Today we have a very special guest, and actually this is a very special episode of the Rushfield Lunch. Um, my guest is the great Joshua Bearman, writer, uh, builder, empire builder, um, filmmaker, the podcaster, a man of all media, a storyteller, adventurer and storyteller. I think
Hmm.
would would cover it all. Who has written? Who we're speaking today about his latest story, which we have some resonance of today. He has written a great piece in the New York Magazine about growing up in Altadena, which had the effects of the fires there and all that, and with an interesting parallel as we were very you moved when you were how old to Altadena?
I was 8 or 9. I think about 8.
So
Yeah.
I moved when I was 9 to Pacific
Ah.
Palisades.
Oh, no kidding. I
So
didn't.
so
Yeah.
we represent the two communities destroyed by fire that we moved to at the same age, and I think we have some different reactions to our history there and to the what happened there that we'll go through.
Mm.
Uh, we'll talk about that. Everybody, feel free to put your messages, questions, heckles, comments, concerns. We're equipped to handle all relationship advice, whatever you need. We can take it here. But write your messages at the bottom there. We will be watching. Thank you for all joining. So let's start at the ending of your story here. Tell me about your piece. Tell me about what inspired you to write the piece. Looking back on Altadena, it's a beautiful piece. Everyone should read it. It has a very long title. So I wrote the full title.
Well, I think in the the headlines, as you know, are all written by
Yeah,
the editor. Uh, my title was "Fire: A Love Story," but it is now called "Mark's House Is Gone, Heather's House Is Gone, Eddie's House Is
right.
Gone." What was lost in the fire, and the subhead, like what was? Can you regain what's lost, or something? Um, and Yeah, so that's kind of that's a good, it's emotional. People definitely were responding to that title, even though it's not quite as succinct. But
I
well,
I felt that it's a powerful title, but it does it's not SEO ready,
that's
unfortunately.
right.
So
Yeah, it's
uh,
unusual. It's unusual, and the piece itself is very unusual for a magazine these days. But well, I'll tell you how this got started. I mean,
yeah, please.
I, I have written. Do I need to explain the whole background on what my deal is? I mean, like, should I give
Well,
the
you
brief?
know what? We're going to go through your whole
Okay.
illustrious
Okay.
career. So,
Well, I'll start with this. Yeah. I'm a film and TV writer and producer, but I started in journalism, so I still do magazine stories now and again. And my editor at New York Magazine called because they were going to, need fire coverage. So, like on January 8th, Genevieve Smith, who's the number 2 New York Mag, calls like, what's going on with these fires here in LA? And I was like, well, I was actually in Altadena, and had gone to check on my parents' house and a bunch of other friends' houses. Place was still on fire, and then I was like, well, like I mean, it was insane and upsetting and all that stuff that we kind of know. But what I said that was stood out to Genevieve was like, I was kind of looking at where the fire, I happened to be looking right where the fire started. I was like, it's all burnt and bare now. But I was like, this was the kind of leafy forest where we used to sneak into the woods with peach schnapps and like fool around, like in high school. And then she was like, "Oh yeah, why not? Like that's what somebody needs to write about because nobody knows that. Nobody that we know in the media world really grew up there. It's pretty unusual. We know a lot of people that had moved there in the past 10 years. You and me most, and probably a lot of people
well,
on the
we're the
link.
last LA natives
Yeah,
still
exactly.
here. And so
And
do you find this that you meet people in LA and they say people always say, "Where are you from?" And you say, "Oh, I'm from here actually." And they're like,
mhm.
"Really?"
Yeah,
It's like you said you're from like Juneau, Alaska, or something. So
Yeah.
so weird to meet someone from LA here in LA.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's like a secret fraternity, and well, and then what's even more distinct about it from Altadena is that you were on the West Side and were exposed to people in the world of entertainment, and I think you went to Crossroads, right? And,
I
like,
did, yes.
I didn't even know what Crossroads was until, like, I was 25, like, that Altadena was so far removed from that, so it's even more like, oh, all the people I know now that grew up in LA, like, kinda tend to know each other, and Altadena was its own weird world, and that's kinda what I wound up writing about, and I just was writing what became a memoir. I didn't know what I was writing, and I just started sending it in pieces to Genevieve, and she's like, "This is great, keep going." So I kinda tried to, like, throw a lot of balls in the air about different ideas. My father was a physicist at JPL, and that's why we moved there, and Richard Feynman, who was a very famous physicist and, who won the Nobel Prize, lived
I
there.
read that his cameo there. I'm a big
Yeah,
Richard Feynman fan, and
yeah. Did you
his cameo was great, a great part of that there. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, he was such this kind of towering figure and this eccentric scientist, which sort of kind of is emblematic of Altadena in some way because there's a lot of eccentrics and Altadena and Pasadena had been like where bohemian socialites in the turn of the last century came west. And so it was kind of that environment. And then so I wrote some history, some coming of age and really growing up there, and then also just went very, very personal because once I started writing about it, I was like, "Oh, I'm excavating this past," and I basically was thinking like, "Well, normally in life, your memories are fallible and the places you've been are durable." And I was
yeah.
like, "Well, what happens now that the place is gone and the memory has to do this extra duty?" And so I kind of wrote this giant, weird, sprawling piece that I've like tried to really like write one for the ages. I kind of went back and read some classic personal essays. I mean, this type of writing is not really appear in magazines anymore. So
Yeah.
when I sent it in, I didn't know is this going to work, and then they said, yeah, we this is kind of like we were talking about. It came out on the 6 month anniversary, so the idea was it sort of was like it's like the eulogy, like be at the
Yeah.
funeral you're about to go back to your car and live the rest of your life and move on, and you need to hear some comforting, you know, words that tell you something about life. So that's kind of what it is, and it's been very moving. I'm against all these emails from all
So
over.
you evoke a Los Angeles that it tells a real story of how the city has changed and progressed, and how our generation has sort of where we come from. It's not Joan Didion Los Angeles, not and it's not
No.
Freddie Snellis Los Angeles, but kind of Eve borders on Eve Babbitt's land. I
Mhm,
think a little
mhm,
bit with
yeah, a little
uh,
bit. Yeah,
Babbitt's adjacent, maybe.
yeah. She's
Um,
time in Pasadena at the Pasadena Art Museum.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there, but the same sense of kind of the high and low and the collision of worlds, and you have these great physicists. You have the McNally mansion, and you have
Hmm.
this really special area that Altadena was that I didn't really know about
Yeah.
until the fire, where you had this really, the only probably racially mixed neighborhood of that sort in Los Angeles. But you had, we lived our generation lived a very free range childhood,
Hmm.
um, where you could do all sorts of crazy things happen. You had all kinds of amazing adventures, but there was also sort of an edge to it, and violence even that would not be at all
Yeah.
except like with every the incidents from my youth, the incidents you would set off every alarm bell
Right.
in the world as they happen if they happen today. So how do you think back on that whole environment? Just seems like something completely lost, and
Hmm.
even before the fire. How do you think about that?
Well, that's true. I mean, I've observed this phenomenon of how parenting and the generations are different and how life in general is different before, but I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't really put words to it until I wrote this piece and was evoking this lost place and realizing, yeah, in fact, how different it was. My nephews were raised like near my parents' house, and I think that they didn't like leave their parents' sight until they were 12 years old, you know?
I
Um,
mean, if I at age 8, I was taking the bus to downtown Los Angeles to go to comic book conventions and thing. Age 8 or not, like if
yeah.
if I let my 11-year-old take the bus by herself to go. So I mean, they'd call Child Protective Services.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
literally, she'd be removed from my custody.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, I've even yeah, it's funny. I described this thing in the story where there was this guy that would show up with a van, and you could give him 50 cents, and he would take you to Venice Beach, and it was
What
not
the
official. It was not part of anything. It was like literally a guy just showed up, and we would go. We didn't tell our parents; they had no idea we were getting on this random dude's. And then by the way, you'd be like, you better
I
behave.
mean, that would be the top story on every
Yeah,
local news show right now. A
yeah,
guy shows up and asks
yeah. The
children if they
beach
want to
van.
get in the
Yeah.
van. Yeah.
And then, by the way, then the piece came out, and my dad read this, and then he did not mention it at all. Never. I was like, oh, I wonder if my dad knows, because I say I don't think, and our parents even knew we were getting on this beach van. But yeah, the world is obviously very different, and there was some, um, possibility of exploration and kind of like self adjustment and all these things that I, I, I do have a little bit of a theory. This is now we're talking really tangential, but like
Yeah.
that, why the sort of sensitivity needle has changed politically, generationally, um, and that it's partly because of in the Gen X. I'm solidly Gen X. You're Gen X.
Mm.
Of youth, you were number one free, and you had to basically figure out how to navigate things on your own. So you were used to like some weird shit happening, and you had to figure it out, and things being uncomfortable. And then on top of it, there was no blur, or there was no lines in um, like adult and youth culture. I mean, I watched Transformers and
Yeah.
stuff. Also, like my dad would just take me to see like Kramer versus Kramer, or we'd be sitting with my parents
Yeah.
watching Street Blues, and this was like hard adult drama.
No,
And
I there was no there was absolutely no sense that there were movies that were not appropriate for children. Like, and I mean,
and cable allowed you to do also watch it, even if your parents were trying to be on top of. On
every
top.
weekend I went by from when I was fifth grade, I would go with my friends to Westwood, and when we wanted to see an R-rated movie, we'd either just sneak in or we'd ask someone in line, like, can you buy our ticket for us?
Yeah,
And no one ever said no. Like,
right.
in years of doing that, no one has
Totally.
ever said.
I know. I remember buying a ticket to see like Arthur, and then sneaking in to see Friday the 13th or Part Two or something. and
No, no
And
one
I was
would
like,
have
I was like
batted an
13
eye.
years old.
And like the thought, like, should children be seeing this? Like, it wouldn't have occurred to them. You have a quote. You described this fascinating place, the Zorinthians Ranch.
Oh yeah,
Want to
Zorthian, yeah.
quote? You say everyone knew the Zorinthians Ranch was a place of drug fueled revelry, as I recall it. No one clutched their pearls. Never a peek from town officials or parents about the nonconformist enclave in the woods. And I mean that's how it was like. What it was
Yeah,
like. Of course, you go to a drug orgy. Why?
yeah,
Why would
yeah.
we stand in your way?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's true. I mean, now I have a toddler, and I'm thinking about how to raise him in a
So,
completely different world where it's like now I feel like there's a lot more to be protective of. I don't know. Maybe I'm falling victim to the same mentality. Um,
I mean, but uh, in there was great comedy. There was great. It was certainly grew a lot and learned a lot of resilience. But like as I alluded to, I mean, I saw some horrible things happen. That I won't go into them, but
mhm.
I experienced some terrible things.
Yeah.
And things that would be, I can't imagine like if my children going through them, but
Uh-huh.
there were all these things, and you sort of hope that th- there that all these things that we sort of that you talked about your friend who was going schizophrenic and started
Mhm.
presenting
Yeah.
as Jesus, and
Yeah.
we just sort of accepted, like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
uh,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you, but when I got older, I would look back and say, like, well, that wasn't right that this thing was happening, and that was.
yeah.
So is it
Right,
good that we went through all this? Is it good?
right,
Are we better for it? Should we have been protected more? Should we?
right.
I mean, I think we're the best generation, so can't argue with it. And but I I wouldn't my children, if they were got anywhere close to some of these things, I
Yeah.
would be absolutely horrified.
No, it's true. I mean, also then I think about, you know, I sort of like made it through by the skin of my teeth to be like a normal adult. So, it seems fine now. I was like, yeah, it was great. We struggled and we persevered. Um, we explored and we became ourselves. I mean, I kind of write something like this in there. Um, but Well, and I say this in there too, like I wrote this whole section. I'm like, "Oh, look at this, these tales of picaresque youth," and then I was like, "Well, wait
No.
a second. Actually, it also was." I kind of back it up, and I'm like, "Well, it was also hard," and then reflect on how nostalgia uh, is a seductive narrator, I think is how I put it, and how I was like, and I think I reflected explicitly like, well, I want to have this kind of like thumb on the scales of memory here because I want Altadena to be this thing that I remember, but I have to also accept that it's something else, and that something else is. I don't know. It's interesting you mentioned because I hadn't thought about this piece. Like maybe it is also what allowed me. A lot of what comes into the story is all this other personal stuff unrelated to the fire about like tough things that happen when life did not work out for some people, and we
Yeah.
use like the adulthood entails tragedy, and when you're a kid, you might be near it, but you don't quite realize it. So you kind of get you move through, and then that allows you to sort of like maybe be resilient as an adult. And I kind of reflect on that as how to think about this loss even about the dean. I'm like, well, it's really fucking hard, but it's like, your stories about yourself or how you like reconstruct yourself to deal with emotional
Mm.
tragedy and catastrophe. And so that's sort of like what collectively people have to do, I guess. And that's actually a lot of the email I'm getting is like, oh, you put into words like this vague sense that I had of like I needed some like footing, to go forward.
Yeah, I want to read a extended paragraph. I know nothing writers less than having their work quoted to
Mhm.
them, but I want to do it. But it really it came at the end of your piece, and it really beautifully uh, summed up what was going on here. I think wrote the symbolic loss of Altadena feels even more acute now as we see the failed promise of America being channeled into a cynical populist nightmare. Because Altadena was a place where that promise had been fulfilled, what we lost in the fire wasn't just a town, it was a historical arrangement, living evidence of the post war American compact, that brief window between the Great Depression and Reagan when there was a shared national project, and the story behind it felt true because there was a sense that someday that story could include anyone. Altadena embodied that durable civic optimism, a place where middle class America was not a fantasy, where a teacher's salary could really get you your own yard and a lemon tree. Our childhood was exploratory, not preparatory. We were not brands in progress, we were just kids. The world was porous. Altadena was how things were supposed to be, and suddenly it was all smoldering debris. That captures a lot of
Yeah.
feelings I think we're having at this time, and brings
Yeah.
brings them together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was like January 7th was the fires, and then January 19th or whatever was the inauguration. I was like, these things. are symbolically related, because Altadena really was, and still was. It had survived in that form as this kind of multi-ethnic, multi-generational, middle class
So was
Mayberry.
it that was my question? Was it still my perspective from the other edge of the fire is very different because the Palisades had when I grew up there, it had a very fancy. It was kind of a third of it was very fancy, and two-thirds of it was very kind of normal middle class town, as much of LA was
Yeah.
in those days. But that part in the last 30 years, like all disappeared. Like
Hmm.
there was no norm. There hasn't been a normal middle class part of the Palisades for a long time. But like every uh, every store I knew, every place to hang out was
Oh,
long
oh, wow. I didn't quite
long
realize.
gone before the
Uh,
fire. So it was like I was very sad for it. But it was not as though the street names, the hills, the Palisades fire started at this rock that was like right above my house, like with the 10-minute climb up for my house where we don't well go, but all of the town. So I had very obviously the fire is a terrible thing, devastated for no many people lost their homes, and it
mhm.
couldn't be more distraught for them. But the town had really changed its character in a way that LA had changed its character. But Altadena was you didn't have that feeling of like had preserved
It
its
had been basically preserved. I mean, it was changing, obviously. Like Altadena had been gentrifying over time, and um, so now there were, like a couple of cool, like there were some out satellites of like Silver Lake, staples, right? I think there was a home state up there, and like a Go Get 'em Tiger, maybe there were a couple of those things going on.
when
It
the
was like,
Go Get 'em Tiger comes, that's you know what's going to follow. It's
yeah, exactly.
the
Um,
Sephora is only a few blocks
yeah.
behind. It's
Well, I mean, it is interesting having lived in Silver Lake and Echo Park too, and seeing neighborhoods radically change. Altadena was not quite on that trajectory, I think, partly because it was just far enough and it's also dispersed. And so, um, and the people that were going there were like, tended to be like, probably starting families and so on. And I knew a lot of people, so I probably knew 30, 40 people whose houses burned down, maybe half people that I stayed in touch with from, I mean, I surely know many more, but I just never counted who I knew growing up. And probably about 10, 12 people that I was still really tight with from growing up, and then maybe 20 people who had moved there in the past 10 years. And they were like actors, John C. Reilly lived up there,
mm,
Andy Moore lived up there. Couple people, and so it was changing a little bit, but that was just a sprinkle, and it had I think the housing prices had started to look more like, you know Eagle Rock and Echo Park and stuff, but um the place hadn't changed too much. It was still like Steve's Pets, the Webster's
mm,
stationer, and the mom and pop hardware store, and the housing stock hadn't changed very much. I think a lot of the Palisades, like, the
yeah,
old bungalows have been replaced with these giant mansions. And in Altadena, the housing hadn't really changed. People had renovated, but um, and so it was still, it wasn't like when I was in the 80s, it was like 40% black and then maybe 20% various other ethnicities and, whatever remains there, and 40% white, maybe.
so
Um,
yeah,
and
it was
then the black
extraordinary.
population started to fall in the past 20 years. And also I should say, like, Altadena and Northwest Pasadena are essentially one neighborhood. So some of these demographics actually also pertain to Northwest Pasadena and remain in big parts of Pasadena. Pasadena is different, where it's like down in Pasadena, there were like a really rich, San Marino adjacent,
Mm,
like mansions on the Arroyo. There were 5 private schools. Altadena was not like that. It was basically the same. And it's what attracted me there.
I wanna ask about one particular name that came up in your piece that I hadn't realized was over there. But it was great to hear. But you grew up around K Rock,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
which was a huge part of all of our youth there. But
yeah.
you were talk to me about K Rock back in so
Mm.
K Rock introduced new wave and punk and all the other things
Yeah,
to the world of Los Angeles.
yeah.
What what was it like? You actually were at the station and things like
Hmm.
that. So tell me
Yeah,
about all.
yeah. I mean, so K Rock was this independent, uh, multi-format radio station because the DJ sort of played what they liked, and there was like Jed the Fish and Poor Man and all these like sort of legendary DJs that had the very eclectic kind of playlists. And Rodney Bingenheimer was sort of probably the most influential one because in the 70s he was playing like he's played the Ramones and Talking Heads, and he played punk rock, and I think he played the first kind of British punk in
Yeah.
Los Angeles and stuff on his show Rodney on the Rock. And he also like it was so funny because he was like this very low energy kind of dude, be like, "Hey guys, it's Rodney. Now we're gonna play some Red."
He was the least sort of punk personality. He was like this elfin
Yeah.
little.
Yeah. He was an elfin little like low energy guy who sounded like he was 10 feet away from the mic, and then would be residing at Canner's. He would hang out on the strip and go to all the clubs. He was at the Whiskey and then whatever, and then he'd be at Canner's. He's probably still there. I think he's still
He's
alive.
still self-medicating his diabetes by eating a giant stack of pancakes with tons of syrup on it. Uh,
Yeah. And so that station was like this really influential, and it happened to be in Pasadena. And so my friends, when I was pretty young, I had friends with older brothers who one older brother's girlfriend worked there, and then another friend's older brother worked there, and they then would get us tickets, and we would go see, like all these shows when I was younger than you would normally wind up at like a Black Flag show or whatever. Uh, and also that was a guide. Like that's how I knew about all this stuff. So I feel in kind of retrospect, again, I was like kind of lucky to have this um, exposure to this unique thing that doesn't exist anymore.
yeah,
And now K-Rock is part of Clear Channel or whatever and plays the same, it's
and
play.
Richard Blade does the '80s show on Sirius XM.
Yeah, right.
So
Played.
the
Exactly.
it all comes around. You so moving forward in your story uh, a bit, I want to jump ahead to another iconic place that you were a part of that really defined LA culture, the LA Weekly.
Hmm.
Tell me about your journey to join the LA Weekly and what the LA Weekly. It, it's what actually one of the I want to complain to you. One of the great things in researching for this lunch was that got me furious with the state of the LA weekly archives online and the difficulty in finding a lot of your pieces there. A lot of
Yeah.
pieces I remember. So but it's hard for people to understand like how big a footprint LA Weekly
Yeah.
was back in the alternative week. I mean that was just the arbiter of what was cool and life and
Yeah.
getting a way people no blog can approach that. What was it like being part of that, and how did you become
Yeah.
part of it? And
It was, yeah, I mean, I started the LA Weekly in maybe 2006, five, I think five. Um, and this was basically like the real peak of the alt weekly because it was before the all weekly's entire business model was basically eroded almost overnight by Craigslist. Um, and the LA Weekly was maybe a little bit past like the true heyday. I think the deep heads would say like the 90s LA Weekly, which what I grew up reading was really the time. But when I was there, all those people were still around, and actually there's a whole section cut out of the piece about Mike Davis, who was started the LA Weekly and who I knew,
yeah,
who I learned all about the fire ecology from. And that got cut out of the piece because everybody's like, yeah, we know all that stuff. But he would be there. There'd just be all these kind of legends around.
so
And
many. I mean, the list of great writers, and I mean all of LA's great writers came from the LA Weekly.
yeah,
You could
The
say
Life in Hell started. The Simpsons started there.
The
Like
Simpsons. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, the great Matt Groening would still like turn in a cartoon once a week to like Tom Christie, whoever edited the cartoons, and even when I was there, like there were new Life in Hell cartoons, and
within the film world, everybody had opinions about the different critics and which critic they liked better, and and
when
would
I was there,
argue about
Elva was the critic. She gave me my first like cover story,
that.
and
Was John Powers still?
John was there. Yeah, John was there. Yeah, he was great. He had a weekly column that was sort of like opining about culture at large, which was great, crystal prose. And then, of course, Nikki, our old
Well,
pal.
that I was leading us towards that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, so
But just to really quickly say like I was like yes, it's hard to understand now just how dominant because even in New York, where the Voice was older, there was the Voice, New York Press, the Observer. There was like the Daily News. There's like 9 newspapers. In the LA Weekly, there's the LA Times, Daily News, and in Los Angeles, the LA Times, Daily News, and the LA Weekly. And the LA Weekly was the sole all weekly, and it was like 200 pages thick and like 7 feet tall, and it was just like you had to pick it up to know what was happening, and it
and
was so much
of
so
those
influential.
three, only one had any foothold in anything resembling coolness.
Correct. Yeah.
Like there was no
LA
whatever
Times
the
this.
whatever the LA Times was, it was not remotely cool in any way. So
Yeah. The LA Times at the time was trying to be like the Post, be like a national, international, like a regional paper that became an international paper. And the LA Weekly, I mean, dude, the LA Weekly, when I was there, Laurie Ochoa, well, also, by the way, Jonathan Gold this is right when I
yeah,
was there, Jonathan won the Pulitzer. It was the first food critic to ever win the Pulitzer, basically created the entire food world that we live in now, like the whole
right.
idea of thinking about food in a sophisticated way. And he was married to Lori, who was the editor in chief. Lori's secretary was Ron Athey, who's this kind of famous performance artist who's bald and
Yeah.
face tattoos and only wore like very tiny, tight short shorts and no shirt, just like that's who you would greet when like Gray Davis would come in to seek the editorial recommendation of the political reporters, like Ron Athey would bring the donuts, and so it's like it had all this great mix of uh, politics, culture, music. Obviously, then the music criticism was so key. And then there was Nikki's column.
So I want to set this up. So Nikki Fink at that time, Nikki Fink had started at the LA Times in the 1980s, and then had this illustrious career where she had written for every great publication in America and been fired by all of them, and ended up doing a column for the LA Weekly about the business. With that, it was kind of her last stop of her career. And then one day she met Josh Beerman, and he had an idea for her.
Yeah, well, I had been writing for the LA Weekly, and then I had been uh, hired into a new position as the web editor, because this was like, if you can imagine this, like everybody is sitting around the old editors, like Mark Cooper and whatever, we're just like, I guess we need to have a web presence. Like there was barely a website. The
Should
website
we
was
do this
hand,
Yeah.
yeah, it was being hand coded in like Dreamweaver like like the HTML being hand coded every week, every Thursday or whatever. Um, and so I was like, yeah, okay. They were like, Bearman's the young whippersnapper. Let's see what you come up with. And I had been on the campaign trail covering um, campaigns and stuff, and I met Ezra Klein, who at the time was a student at UC Santa Cruz
Uh,
and had a blog. And so I was paying attention to like, okay. And then I tried to hire Ezra as a columnist, and then um, they didn't want to pay him. Uh, this relates to Nikki. Sorry, I wanted to hire him as a columnist, but I also said we should just buy his blog, which at the time was called Pandagon. And collectively, Pandagon had more traffic than all of the LA Weekly's site. LA Weekly still just killed and was minting money in print, but it didn't really have an.
largely, largely, can we say, on escort ads?
Yes, escort ads
Like,
and general class. There was like 30 pages of classifieds in the back, but
yeah.
yes, and And so then they didn't want to pay him. It was some, it'll be funny to think about. It was like $400 a month or something. I was like, if you pay him $400 a month, he'll be stoked to just have Pentagon bring all this traffic to the LA Weekly's political section and in general. And they said no, and they were all stingy with the money. And so then I was annoyed. And then um, it was actually Lori who was like, "We should make Nikki have a blog." She loves it, and
The,
she she hated the idea. She was like, "Don't, I
I,
don't want
I,
to
I,
talk about that."
I don't need no internet in my.
Yeah, I don't need no internet. Exactly. She's like a blog, blah blah blah. I mean, also by the way, I like never even saw her in person. I would just like pick up the phone and she'd just start yelling at me, and and she. So then I said, we're not going, Nikki. I got a great idea. We're not going to create a blog. We're going to create a um a daily online journal for you, for your scoops, for all your scoops. And she's like, "Oh, that sounds great. That sounds great." So then I had to tell the people like doing the blog software, I was like, whatever you do, don't tell her that it's
Don't say the word blog.
oh, yeah, exactly. And so then we made it on WordPress and we had to like tinker with a little bit. And I was like, oh, we'll call it Deadline Hollywood Daily, I think is what it was originally called. And I made the Deadline Hollywood little
So did
logo.
you come up with the deadline name? Was that
Yeah.
how about that?
Yeah. And then and then I was the same thing. I was like, well, Nikki, you should get paid extra because you're doing more work. And then the weekly didn't want to pay for it. So I was like, well, you should tell them in your contract that you own this blog. So she did. And that is why, if I had only had the foresight myself to own a piece of it, I would. um, and then when the New Times came, there was all this politics that the paper and weekly started going downhill, and then she obviously took Deadline and created an independent company, and then sold that to. Did it sell originally to Penske? Who bought it? I can't remember.
Yeah. Jay Pett, that was like his
Yeah,
first
the
acquisition.
first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she made whatever $14 million or something. But she was obviously, as we all know, totally insane, and the lawyers, it was like a weird thing. This will be of interest to you because I know your feelings about her, but like when she had a column that was in the paper, like the lawyers would go through it sentence by sentence because
That,
we don't want to get sued. And then when it was online, somehow nobody did that, and then that allowed her to just freewheel into her,
so
redeem her.
so she saw, here's a place where I don't have to deal with any of that fact checking
Yes.
nonsense,
Yeah.
which was the fact that the sort of people thought that the internet was under kind of it wasn't covered by standard libel law. This was
Right.
you were just creating a bulletin board essentially, even
Yeah.
even your that was the prevailing wind. I mean, and something escaped from the lab right there under your watch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then she's allowed to just, go to print with whatever crazy ass things that she heard. Um, I think I told you the story that like
Yes, yeah. I was hoping for this one.
she the guy who would edit her actual print column, which persisted when she even had the Deadline Hollywood Daily, um, was the guy named Alan Middlestat, who was the news editor, and she would call him and start yelling and freak out or whatever. And so then one day he didn't want to deal with her anymore, and she just kept calling, and he was like, "I'm busy." And then she called, and it was a Tuesday night. The paper closed it on Tuesdays, and so it was an election night, and it was like when Villaraigosa, I think it was Villaraigosa, became the mayor,
Sounds
and
right.
um and so he was like, Nikki won't stop bothering him. So he got it in his head. He's like, I know, I'll throw her off the scent here because the only thing Nikki loves more than bothering people is a scoop. And so he was like, Nikki, I can't talk right now because we got a great scoop going here. And she's like, oh, what is it? And he's like, okay, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anybody. Just don't tell a soul. Like, she's like, okay. He's like, I got to stay at the desk. We're going to be up all night on this one. And then she's like, okay, what is it? And he's like, well, the election's happening. We got our people all over the city, and we got a report that these two gorillas escaped from the zoo, went into a voting booth, and voted for Via Vegas. And then he kind of had a droll sense of humor, which this to anybody else would be obvious. Like you're goofing around. She's like, "Oh my god, okay, all right, you deal with that." I was, and then
Irony wasn't in her repertoire. It was
and then the next day she called him, like Wednesday, and he picks up the phone. He's like, "Nikki," and then she's like, "So what happened?" And he had forgotten even what he said. He didn't even know what somebody said. He knew what happened. She's like, "The gorillas who voted for Barracosa." He's like, "What? How?" I was just goofing around, but it gives you a sense of how credulous she was, right? It says a lot about what Deadline Hollywood, what Deadline.com became.
Yeah. And her sources that she became plugged into some of the greats who decided to use her were then became took made use of that of those one a woman of great talents and enormous blind spots.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had a soft spot for her. She was because I had to talk to her about her personal life sometimes, and whatever. Had some sympathies, but yeah, that was one of my early adventures.
We have to leapfrog. Unfortunately,
Mm,
the time goes too fast. But the thing that before we get to your curriculum for Hollywood, I want
mm,
to talk about Epic and
yeah,
one of Josh. What no, you're the person you've always you've come in and you've sort of you kind of make these declarations. You're going to do these giant things, and then you just go out and do them and succeed phenomenally. And you founded Epic, which is describe what Epic is and what
sure.
we've done.
Yeah, so Epic is basically a publisher of original nonfiction and also a film and TV production company. Because when I left the Weekly and I started writing for Wired and Rolling Stone and GQ and Harper's, and I did a lot of This American Life stories. And those were big narrative stories. So like kind of classic, old school, feature well, rousing tales of people doing weird shit. And they started getting optioned for the movies. The very first magazine piece, like national magazine piece I wrote was a Wired piece that then became Argo. And so then,
That's a big I mean writing a magazine story that then becomes not only option for a movie but then gets made and then the movie wins best picture.
yeah,
That's quite a hole in one to hit on your
it
first outing.
believe me, yes, exactly. And then I was like, look at this is easy. Hollywood, like wander in.
Just
Clooney comes and I'll do it.
find a
Let's do it.
story,
And then
we'll win an Oscar every year.
yeah, win the Globes, the BAFTAs, all the Guild Awards, and the Oscars. Yeah, it's only downhill from there, really. But it was obviously exciting and a fun time, and kind of um, became then on the drafting on that. I then started Epic with a friend of mine who was also a magazine writer named Josh Davis. He had sold a lot of stories as well, so we started it, built this company, published a bunch of nonfiction. We had an overall deal at 20th Fox on the feature side for a while. We've made a bunch of TV shows and movies. We've made 2 shows and 3 movies, and about to start shooting a movie for Paramount in September. We have 3 docs in the works, and 2 are coming out in the fall.
And if you
And
I
so,
just going last night, I just was going through your archives. The number of like great stories you've published and written is I mean look at it, it's really phenomenal. Like you could spend many happy hours and days like browsing through those archives there. So
thank you.
what your kind of specialty is you find these little forgotten corners or unreported tales of history,
Hmm.
like what Argo became, and you don't you really bring them to life with new reporting and information and everything. How do you tell me what's your secret for finding those? Just between us,
Yeah, yeah,
finding those tales.
yeah.
Like you do everything from the Iranian hostage crisis to Galileo to Huey Newton.
Mhm. Yeah.
How do you find all these great stories?
Yeah. Well, I mean, nowadays, um, there's a bunch of different techniques. One is reading local newspapers, looking for interesting stories that are sort of like not quite fully developed, right? Where there's like, oh, that's weird. What's that? Like let's look more into that. And then you track down the source and you realize like, oh, this story is bigger, it's more interesting. A lot of news is just news, right? So it's like what you need then is the narrative where you get the character or the emotion, etc. And so the some of it is just kind of like scouring, and then or we'll like hear about a story, and now me and Josh Davis have this giant list of like, oh, things to maybe pursue. And then people, I've several stories I've just heard. Somebody told me, it's like, oh, I know this guy
Mm.
who did this thing, right? Um, and then now we get pitched a lot of stories. Um, we get stories. A lot of what we publish now is by other people, but still, I'd say about half of the stories are things that we find, and often, or you'll read something in another piece of
Hmm.
anything, be anything that's, there'll be like one sentence. You're like, well, what's that about? And let's find out more about that. Um, some like lazy afternoons on Wikipedia. It kind of takes just like, sort of poking around. Davis, my partner, by the way, he has several stories he has just thought, well, I bet you there has been a feud between rival ice cream truck drivers. And then we just sent a reporter to go find one, and sure enough, he found one, reported it. It was better than you would have ever imagined because it's real people, and real people are weirder. And like it had this whole like nativist immigrant kind of angle on top of it, and it's also like who everybody just wants to be happy and eat ice cream, but they can't be happy. Had all this emotion. Great story called the Cold War, and that was one where we were just like we worked backwards. We're like, what if there was a story about this, and then went and found it.
And then it manifested.
Yeah.
Um, that's right. What is the appetite of Hollywood these days for great stories? How is that? I mean,
Well,
as
yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure, I probably won't be saying anything new to you in general, but maybe like my experience of it is obviously it's harder than it used to be to sell any project, right? And of course, true stories often, we have a lot of very contemporary stories too. But if it's historical, it's getting a little bit harder. Um, and things need to be packaged more. If it's TV, you've got to be basically going with like a very sort of dyed in the wool blue chip showrunner. There's lot less risk taking. A lot of things are being packaged, as you probably have. You guys have covered this. Like even things really well packaged with cast have then not sold. Um, I feel like that's about to open back up a little bit, or maybe has already some. Um, but then simultaneously, a um, there still is this kind of like default instinct to want to buy something. So to have IP, to have like some basis for a thing. So a friend of mine is a big showrunner. Not going to name him because I don't know if he wants me to, but like he has a show. He's nominated for Emmys. He's got a big show everybody watch probably. And he heard a great true story and he was like, you talk to the source and you write this whole piece and we'll do it and then we'll go sell that. And I was like, okay, but like you're the showrunner. If I had this piece, I'd be going to you to like come up with a pitch. And when we'd go sell it together, like why do you need me in this particular case? And he's like, it's just, you want all bullets, to be firing simultaneously. So, um, I could do a pitch, but it's like and then by the way, once we got in there and really interviewed this subject, then of course the story got even better and more complex and so on. And so it gives you, in our case, that material, the process gives you basically a better pitch ultimately. But I feel like the appetite is so it's like it's IP, nonfiction IP is still there's this like default need for it. However, the big glut of it like 3 4 years ago has swamped the boat a little bit, and so
Hmm.
now it's only like the really high level things that are coming in with high level talent or showrunners is what's selling.
So the pipeline has to clear itself. Things have to work through a bit.
Yeah.
Interesting. How long do you typically spend on one of your stories that you
Well,
personally write?
yeah. I mean, they can take a long time. My last narrative piece, which was also a New York Magazine, and it was very long. It was like a novella. It was like 25,000 words. Um, I spent probably like, if you added up all the time and put it back to back, probably 9 months, I'd say, something like that.
Does does it worry you for our civilization that there are a really small and shrinking number of people that will spend 9 months on a
Yes.
story right
Yes.
now?
Yes. I actually believe that the death of the narrative nonfiction piece, it basically doesn't exist anymore. Like what I do does, it's almost non-existent
Yeah.
in the magazine world because there's no business model for it, and you would spend 9 months on a story and it gets the same amount of traffic as like somebody's fucking hot take about like Lena Dunham show. And but I have been developing this thesis, and I'm a little bit biased, obviously, because this is my original creative field, but that the feature well narrative nonfiction story, which used to be so important in the media landscape. If you think about it, it wasn't even that long ago. 10 years ago, every magazine had two, three big stories in it. There were 10, 15 magazines that would have those stories. One or two of them would be not topical, not political, not cultural, not a narrative, not a profile. It would be a narrative about like somebody that you don't know anything about, and you learn about life by reading that story start to finish. And that was the main way that people encounter. This was also before documentary, before the glut of like sensational documentary now in streaming. So it's like that's the way you would encounter other people in some structured story form.
Mm,
And that was for 40, 50 years, right? That's a unique
yeah.
form of American letters and media and journalism. And like that's how I feel like that gave people, and when that was a mass medium, a window into other people's lives, and that's of course how you understand each other and blah blah blah. And so there's some, to me, democratic and moral imperative on telling those stories in that way. But the truth is that I don't think there is
I mean,
much of a future in it. I think it's
when the magazines that sponsored it are by and large
gone.
disappearing
Yeah,
themselves, or yeah, and
yeah.
it's yeah, somehow I don't know, maybe Substack begins to do it, but
It's funny. I've
the,
been talking to Hamish, as and all. I know him from like covering the launch of Epic, because he was the
oh yeah,
reporter.
did he?
Yeah, and I've talked to him several times. He approached us like way like years ago. It was like, oh, is there a way to do narrative nonfiction in this format? And didn't understand Substack, to be honest, at the time. So now
Mm,
I was just I'm gonna chat with him again to think about it, figure it out. How could it work? Does it need to be embedded in another set of, a place that has an audience already? I
hmm.
don't know. Got to think about it.
I look forward to the results of that conversation. That's
Hmm.
I'd love to have you. Which brings us to the big final question. Wait, the hour's
Yeah,
gone so fast. I barely gotten through my checklist of things I want to talk about with you. So you'll have to join us again soon. Uh, but
yeah, yeah. Well, maybe in the fall, like maybe we could, because we're shooting this movie in Korea, which is fun, and then we have these two docs coming out nearly back to back. So there's like a lot of the true story is a lot of the fruit is ripening, and so there's maybe a lot to talk about on like the process of getting start to finish, actually, because that's a whole
that
different story.
I would love to revisit that and talk with you. But today we now have Professor Bearman's
Hmm.
curriculum for Hollywood. What you would
Yes.
assign everyone who works in Hollywood to
Hmm.
read, watch, consume, eat, whatever you want. This is the required consumption
Hmm.
for all Hollywood professionals, and we await your assignments, Professor.
Okay. Great. Well, I was inspired by I watched Franklin's uh, uh, interview and his his serious syllabus. So that was what I. Then you emailed me like, doesn't need to be that extensive, but I had already collected it. So so I've got here my notes. I decided I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to uh, cover some great journalism about the film business and some great films about journalism. So
That's great. That's a great class.
yeah, this would be this is a pretty good syllabus here. So um, would start with Picture by Lillian Ross. Do you know this book?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I read that. I read the
Yeah.
great story about the making of Red Badge of
Red Badge of
Courage.
Courage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by John Huston.
So yeah, I mean, Lillian Ross was a staff writer at the New Yorker for like 7,000 years or something. Like really from like 1929 to 19 till like 2010 or something. Like she really was there for a long time. And she um, had this idea to follow John Huston making Red Badge of Courage start to finish and see basically how the creative, she felt like, well, he's an artist. He has a creative mark that he puts on his film. So how does that survive the sausage making of Hollywood? And she insanely, if you can imagine, convinced Dory Sherry, who was the head of MGM at the time, and Louis B. Mayer was still alive and around, to give her full access. So she was in all the meetings where they're sitting in the
It's incredible, and
yeah,
the scene sitting with Dory Sherry at Chasen's as he's kind of
yeah,
shooing away people. It's great. That's a great book.
it's great.
And on the other, incredible that the book, it was originally run as two full issues of the New
Yes,
Yorker, which I
yes,
think became like the best-selling issues the New Yorker had ever seen. Like it was a
yeah,
huge,
yeah,
huge, all of which very hard to imagine these days.
yeah. I know. It's like, yeah, the
Mhm.
full issue, and then then it was bound as a book, which also I think did pretty well. There's one key thing that if there's Hollywood people that are, is like the memo. I forget if it's Dory Sherry or if it's the producer of the film. There's a scene where Houston, there's some whole conflict at the end, which I can't quite recall actually, where he gets frustrated and then basically disappears to go make African Queen. And he's left the film in a state of chaos. And the memo that his producer sits down at his cherry wood leather bound desk writes is not like memos that producers write today. And so it's like really something to see sort of like the thought and care that he put into sort of trying to communicate what he thought the movie needed to be. Um, the next one is The Studio, which is John Gregory Dunn, Joan Didion's husband, who was similarly given unusual access to 20th in 1967. So in this key year, right, where Hollywood is flailing and trying to figure out what to do. Everybody's baffled by the success of the Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate. And so he's in there and they're like making Dr. Doolittle, you know, and like you're seeing this like portrait of Hollywood basically flailing and then trying to figure out what to do with itself.
I love
And
that because it's the origin story of Century City. Because as they're making these movies, there's like, well, if these don't work out, we're gonna have to sell all the real estate of the
right.
studio off, which is
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah.
And then you had Century City.
I think he's like in the office when they're just like pointing out the windows, like, I guess we're gonna have to sell all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
because of Dr. Doolittle, or there was also I think maybe like what's the like Paint Your Wagon, right? Maybe they're making
yeah.
it a Lee Marvin Western where he's singing. So they're spending a lot of money, and then meanwhile coming behind them, of course, is like Bert Schneider and everybody that's about to go change Hollywood with Easy
Yeah.
Rider.
It is kind of breathtaking when you read that, how 3 years later the whole industry would be completely
Right.
different, like swept away. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I mean, then Dunn and Didion went on to write movies. They wrote Panic in Needle Park, I think,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And then they wrote Stars Born. They wrote the
Yeah.
Streisand
We're Streisand one. Yeah.
Stars Born, which is incredible, which I saw recently. Um, so then moving forward, um, I thought this is actually kind of hard to find. I have to look and see how to find it. We can send it to but in 1996, Premiere magazine, remember that?
Mhm.
was a glossy covering, the culture of Hollywood, and this was after David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace wrote his legendary Harper's piece where he got on a cruise ship. He had already established himself as this like difficult fiction writer, and they're like, "What if we send him on a nonfiction, a journalism assignment?" And so after this big Harper's piece about the cruise ship, Premiere said, "Why don't we send him to the set of Lost Highway, the David Lynch film?"
I
And
forgot that piece.
he turned in this like, the assignment was for 7,000 words. He turned in this 25,000 word, deconstructed like series of erudite notes, as his writing was uh, sort of formed around, and then it's this kind of incredible portrait of David Lynch at like the height of his powers. And so that's a legendary one.
I have to find that and reread that. That's good, but just breathtaking thinking of just that so recently within our lifetimes you had a movie magazine publishing a 25,000 word David Foster Wallace piece about David Lynch like that.
Yeah, right, and which, by the way, just like lit up the boards. Like everybody talked about that for like months. Then now thinking about movies about journalism, I thought we would start with His Girl Friday,
Great.
which is, probably a lot of people have seen it, but it's legendary and it's worth remembering. It's written by Ben Hecht, based on his play The Front Page, which was based on his experiences as a reporter. He also started as a reporter. So in my mind, he kind of like looms large. And he was
The
from
classic newsroom there.
Yeah, right. And I don't know if you've ever read any of his journalism, but it's also great. He would write. He was in Chicago. I think he was at the Chicago. He's not a Sun Times type of guy. He would have been a Daily News person. The Sun Times was like the snootier paper.
Right.
And then it was sort of like Joseph Mitchell style. He'd like hang out with all the cranks and eccentrics and weirdos. And then that became the types of characters that he would put in his screenplays. And of course, I think he won 2 Academy Awards for screenplay, nominated 6 times, wrote 100 screenplays, just legend. Then All the President's Men, which bears rewatching. I rewatched it on the night of Trump's first election, just because I couldn't sleep and was like so struck by the story it told about how powerful journalism can be.
Yeah.
It's worth remembering 2 things, which is that this is a world in which 2 guys on the sort of like metro desk at
City Beat.
City Beat, yeah,
City Beat night reporter.
Yes, yeah, and they get this weird, call about these guys are getting arraigned for breaking into the hotel, and they follow this thing all the way, and then it's basically a procedural process piece. There's a whole point where Jason Robards is like, if you don't have a second source, we're not, we can't go with it yet. You got to get more, and then eventually that obviously took down the president and caused Barry Goldwater to, of all people, to storm over and tell Nixon that he had to resign, and then that movie itself could be bloomed so large in the consciousness by showing what was powerful about holding people accountable, right, and what the role of journalism is, and then bringing all these reforms, right, on the back of Watergate itself and that movie being so massive. Hard to remember now. Just like, I mean, this is before my time, so I'm kind of receiving the echo of that culturally, like how dramatic it was able to shift people's conception of what American democracy is supposed to be about.
And that and it changed journalism in that it brought a lot of journalism was a very working class profession before that, and after All the President's Men, a lot of fancy well educated people started flooding into the newsroom.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting. That makes sense, because it became a desirable, like a respectable profession.
Although to this day, there has never been a full-time professional reporter who looked like Robert Redford. So just note that when you watch.
I don't know. Sebastian Junger was pretty handsome in his day, but it's Robert.
He is. But I was, yeah.
Yeah. So then, moving forward, I would say The Insider. Well, I would also just like really linger for a second if we're thinking about like what is the value of what we're trying to do now in Hollywood and how to shape opinions in a world where like the basic set of values that underpin democracy are being eroded. And where do you plant a flag and where do you fight? All the President's Men remains this key touchstone. And, you know, there's a way to there is a way to fight, I think. And I think what we do is important in it. You sounded off on this several times in your columns that like Hollywood is sort of is a little bit abdicating its responsibility
Yeah.
and is as the defining shaper of opinion. Um, and so it's kind of
The
worth
shaper
remembering.
of human consciousness.
Yeah,
All we are the highest point upstream, and it all flows
yeah,
down from us.
yeah.
And
And then so
act like it.
another one that's similar. This movie trailed the opinion, but it depicted this big shift, which is The Insider, the great Michael Mann movie about the tobacco whistleblower Jeffrey Wiggins, who comes to Lowell Bergman at 60 Minutes and blows the whistle on the collusion of the tobacco industry and hiding all the evidence that it's addictive. And so if you think about now, of course, it's so charming when you watch Mad Men, everybody's smoking all the time. But it is hard to, if you think about how opinions change and how culture changes, like it wasn't so long ago. I remember smoking on an airplane myself, like and
No.
going and so it's like like the world can be changed through telling narratives, and The Insider is so good. It's like a thriller that's all in a newsroom, and Pacino is Lowell Bergman, and it's talking about sort of also like protecting sources and showing like sort of basically the deep trench work of journalism. And of course, it's 60 Minutes, so it's especially relevant now as we see sort of the tribulations of CBS's various divisions in the face of a true sort of, autocratic threat.
That's right. Well, that is a great class. You should do the online version of it, and I will attend and take it. Just thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
This has been a
Yeah.
terrific talk. The time flew by
Yeah.
much too fast. So we'll have you back again for
That'd be,
another next week. Our guest,
hmm
Larry King here. Next week,
Yeah. Who's on next?
Orange Greenfield, filmmaker, documentarian, will be with us. Join us next week on the Rushfield Lodge. Thank you very much, Josh.
All right.
Great to
Bye.
see you. I'll see you
Yeah,
soon.
likewise. Bye.